The greatest secret in Hollywood was revealed in 1948. The studios had complete control over the industry, not only the production of films. A small group of influential persons controlled what the American public could see on screen and in theaters. Their once mighty empire crumbled under the weight of the Supreme Court's intervention. But that was only the beginning of the worst decade for Hollywood. Here are some of the ways that the golden era of Hollywood nearly came to an abrupt end, including communist witch hunts and billion-dollar tragedies. It was as if Hollywood were a machine in the 1930s and 1940s. All was under the grip of a handful of influential studios. They created the film. The theaters were owned by them. Which movies were allowed to be viewed was also chosen by them. Studios like MGM, Warner Brothers, and Paramount had complete control of the industry under this structure. Of all of them, MGM was the largest. There were 60 sound machines, 40 cameras, and 6 production lots all operating simultaneously. Its maximum concurrent output was 18 films. However, filmmaking alone wasn't sufficient. The cinemas that screened these companies' films were also owned by them. Owners of independent theaters were compelled to accept the terms offered by the studios. They were compelled to purchase movie packages. The combination of one large budget picture with many lesser ones. By doing so, the big studios ensured that their films would always be shown while blocking any competition. This system was great for a short period of time. Almost 70% of all box office profits went to the largest studios. When the Supreme Court mandated that studios sell their cinemas in 1948, however, everything changed. It was with that choice and the rise of television that Hollywood's golden age began to fade away. However, managing the films wasn't sufficient. Even the stars were under the studio's thumb. They were hands-on creators, not only agents. Anyone may become a legend with the help of the Star Machine. They rebranded them by giving them different names, styles, and personalities. Archibald Leach was the real name of Cary Grant. A woman named Lucille Fay Lesueur was born Joan Crawford. Actors' makeovers were meticulously orchestrated to enhance their attraction to audiences. However, that was only the first step. Studio authority over actors' careers was ceded to them when they signed 7-year contracts. Nobody could let them pick their own parts. They were unable to say no to movies. Their every move, both on and off camera, was overseen by the studio. There was advanced preparation for everything from public appearances and interviews to friendships. The studio might dock a star's earnings or assign them a negative part if they broke the guidelines. Judy Garland was a major star at MGM. The studio signed her when she was 13 years old and didn't stop working with her thereafter. She rose to fame as a leading lady because to her roles in Oz and Meet Me in St. Louis. Things weren't that glamorous, though, behind the scenes. The studio made sure she worked as much as she could by putting her on a tight schedule. The lengthy hours of filming required her to be on medicine, first to keep her awake and later to help her sleep. An ongoing battle ensued as a result of this cycle. She said the studio had taken her youth many years later. Massive stress was building up. Studios demanded that their actors maintain an air of flawlessness at all times. The studio has strict rules on everything from weight to haircuts to smiles. Despite her iconic status, Marilyn Monroe was under continual pressure to uphold a particular image. Both the demands and the expectations were constant and seemed never-ending. Even in personal relationships, the studios had power. As a marketing tactic, they set up weddings, engagements, and dates for their celebrity. It wasn't always love that brought together some of Hollywood's most renowned couples. Their purpose in teaming together was to increase ticket sales. The studio would end a relationship if it didn't match their intentions. If the studio thought an actor's private life might hurt their career, they may try to keep it under wraps. The illusion was the foundation of Hollywood's golden age. The visual representation was flawless. However, a strong structure was in place behind the scenes that shielded its most prominent figures from damage while burying the most serious problems. Those who had the audacity to speak up were promptly put down. Patricia Douglas, a 20-year-old dancer and extra in 1937, was invited to what she believed to be a film set. It turned out to be something totally different when she got there. An extravagant MGM party was planned to amuse a group of sales executives, and over 120 young women were invited. It was clearly not a professional setting. The ladies were coerced into drinking regardless of their desire. After an MGM salesperson assaulted Douglas, the evening became a living nightmare. She was not going to be quiet. She sought medical attention, filed a complaint, and pursued legal action after the incident. But the studio was too powerful. Prior to its examination, crucial evidence was deleted by the hospital associated with MGM. Because of the district attorney's personal connections to studio chief Louis B. Mayer, the lawsuit was prematurely dropped. After then, there was pushback. The studio used the media to cast her in a negative light. The story was skewed to make her look terrible since newspapers published her private data. Potential witnesses who may have lent credence to her case were coerced or threatened into silence. Her attorney skipped out on court when she sought to initiate a civil lawsuit. The lawsuit was dismissed because he was not present. Nothing remained for Douglas. Her narrative was hidden for decades. Historian David Sten did not discover the truth until the early 2000s. With the release of his documentary Girl 27, her life was once again brought to light. Although she was never truly vindicated, her courageous actions solidified her position as one of the pioneering women to confront the seedier side of Hollywood. Her efforts helped start discussions that the industry could no longer ignore, even if they did so at the time. The Douglas case wasn't the first controversy to rock Hollywood. The year 1921 was a banner year for cinema comic Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle. A San Francisco hotel party ruined his career just when he was at the pinnacle of his success. A few days after becoming gravely sick in Arbuckle's apartment, the aspiring actress Virginia Rappe died. Claiming that Arbuckle's bulk had caused major injuries, her companion accused him of harming her. Sensational headlines flooded the media. Suddenly, Arbuckle became a villain because wealthy newspaper owner William Randolph Hearst utilized the tale to sell papers. There were 3 trials in all. No decision was reached in the first 2. It was clear to the jury by the third. It just took 5 minutes for them to declare him innocent and issue a statement claiming the accusations against him were false. Unfortunately, the moment was past. He lost all credibility. His films were taken from theaters and he was barred from working in the industry for years by Hollywood studios. There was more than one individual at the center of this controversy. The public's fury about Hollywood's increasing dominance was stoked by it. As a result, the film business established stringent guidelines for the craft. The HOIS Code, also known as the Motion Picture Production Code, dictated the content and conduct that actors and actresses were required to exhibit in films. The public witnessed the escalation of these crises, but the actual power struggles took place in private. One of the guys whose job it was to keep Hollywood's secrets hidden was Eddie Mannix. Making issues go away was his job as a senior executive at MGM. To shield the studio's image, he resorted to blackmail, threats, and fabrications. The unsolved murder of Paul Byrne, wife of Jean Harlow, was one of the most prominent mysteries associated with him. Many people thought there was more going on than just his suicide, which was the official account. There was speculation that Byrne and Harlow had gotten into a fight, and others that he had a difficult history. Whatever the case may be, Mannix ensured that the public only heard the studio's perspective. In Patricia Douglas's case, he did the same thing by silencing potential witnesses. Either by giving them acting jobs in Hollywood or by causing them to be too shy to speak up. He was joined by others. Howard Strickling was another famous fixer who dealt with issues involving Hollywood stars such as Clark Gable and Judy Garland. These individuals were in charge of the storyline and made sure that the public heard only the things that were good for the studios. That was before 1948. A decision that rocked Hollywood to its foundation came after years of court fights, when the United States Supreme Court stepped in. The result of the case, United States versus Paramount Pictures Incorporated, compelled studios to dismantle their hegemonies. They could no longer control multiplexes or engage in underhanded practices to obstruct rivals. There had been a genuine opportunity for independent cinemas and filmmakers to thrive for decades. It all began in 1938 when the federal government filed lawsuits against the largest studios in Hollywood. Nearly every aspect of the industry was controlled by only 5 firms back then: Paramount, MGM, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox, and RKO. United Artists, Columbia, and Universal, 3 lesser ones, weren't far behind. They conspired to ensure that only their films received preferential treatment in terms of promotion, screenings, and overall success. Block booking was one of their most effective strategies. Theaters were required to purchase entire film packages in order to screen popular films. The majority were forgettable, low-budget affairs, however a few were decent. The acceptance of blind bidding meant that theaters had to pay for movies in advance, even before they could watch them. They couldn't be displayed anyplace else for weeks because of the chaos. Even when independent theaters were able to screen big-budget pictures, they frequently found themselves in an unequal profit-sharing arrangement with the studios. This was finally terminated by the ruling of the Supreme Court. Studios were unable to ensure a home for their films after being compelled to sell up their cinema franchises. They needed to compete if they wanted their films to be successful. As all other people, the traditional Hollywood manner of doing things took a serious hit from this. For a long time, studios were like factories, producing movies on a tight timetable with everyone involved under long-term contracts. Everything has to be rethought now. Studios began making fewer films when cinemas stopped automatically playing them. Take MGM as an example. They nearly halved their annual production. Additionally, the structure that was supposed to keep actors in exclusive contracts broke down. Famous people, who were previously bound to work for only one studio, could now do it anywhere they choose. After years of being ignored, actors, directors, and independent filmmakers finally gained some clout with this change. Concurrently, it was a luxury that only few could manage to purchase. Very few American households had televisions in 1950. There was a precipitous decline in price. The typical family could now afford a set that had been priced at $500 in the late 1940s, since it was closer to $200. It only required that. Now, television had become a commonplace sight. It has to be done. There was an instantaneous effect. People began to remain indoors. Going to the theater? Why? Sit through a movie and pay to see it when you can just switch on the TV and enjoy some free entertainment. 6 hours of daily television viewing had been the norm for the typical American household by the late 1950s. Sales at the box office fell 45% in 1951. There were rows of vacant seats in theaters that used to be crowded with excited spectators. Their audience was being stolen by more than just television. Things were shifting. The large movie theaters in city centers were becoming less appealing, therefore more and more families were relocating to the suburbs. The advent of the automobile ushered in a new era of drive-in cinemas, but not even these could compete with the ease and accessibility of television. There would be no surrender from Hollywood. Studios provided viewers with unique content they couldn't find anyplace else for their home entertainment needs. Films that are larger and more stunning. The widescreen cinemascope format, launched by 20th Century Fox in 1953, gave the impression that the screen was much bigger than it actually was. The Robe, the first film to utilize it, was a smashing success. Many other studios were quick to follow suit, dreaming that people would return for the grand graphics and enormous displays. New technologies was also tested by them. Advertisements for 3D films like As House of Wax and Buona Devil used phrases like "a lover in your arms" and "a lion in your lap" to entice viewers to expect exciting experiences. The thrill, however, was short-lived. Special glasses were needed for 3D. The manufacturing expenses were excessive, and the technology was cumbersome. More color films, improved sound systems, and experimental formats like Cinerama, which utilized several cameras to produce a panoramic image, were all pushed for by studios. All of it fell short. In order to draw more customers, theaters started using gimmicks like complimentary tableware and sweepstakes. Hollywood turned to big-budget epics like Around the World in 80 Days and The Ten Commandments as a last resort. Extravagant showcases of artistic grandeur. Even though they were costly to produce, these films attracted large audiences. A studio may lose millions of dollars if one of them bombed. The fall could be halted by nothing. On a weekly basis, 90 million people visited the cinema in 1948. By 1960, the figure had dropped to 47 million. Not even half of the crowd remained. As time went on, the business shrank and Hollywood's golden era faded. In an effort to save money, studios laid off workers and sold off plots of land that had been home to famous movie sets. A political tempest raged across Hollywood in 1947. The film industry was the target of an inquiry by the House Un-American Activities Committee, WAC. They were hell-bent on preventing the propagation of communist ideology through cinema because they thought it was happening. The result was a devastating repression of free expression in the United States. For their testimony, the committee summoned 43 witnesses. Cast members, crew members, and writers were given personal questions on their values and were encouraged to mention others. For the sake of their careers, some collaborated. Others declined, thinking the probe was unjust. A number of filmmakers and authors known as the Hollywood 10 were among those who refused to back down. Their claim was that they had a First Amendment right to keep silent. In WAC's view, this was improper. 10 of them went to jail after being found guilty of contempt of Congress. Others served a year's term, while some spent 6 months. Blacklisted upon their release, they were unable to secure employment in the Hollywood industry. A media extravaganza ensued throughout the proceedings. Famous faces from Hollywood were divided. Ronald Reagan and Walt Disney both spoke out in support of the probes, asserting that communists constituted a genuine danger. A number of actors, including Lauren Bacall and Humphrey Bogart, spoke out against WAC, saying that the organization was killing innocent people. The FBI, meanwhile, was busy gathering information in the background. J. Edgar Hoover ordered the use of informants and phone tapping to identify and apprehend individuals thought to be communists. Anxieties gripped the whole sector. After that, in 1950, a booklet called Red Channels was produced. It purportedly linked communism to 151 individuals in the media, including radio, television, and movies. The studios paid close attention to this list. People in that group were unceremoniously forced out of their jobs and the industry. As time went on, the blacklist expanded. Also, by the middle of the 1950s, approximately 300 individuals had been barred from entering Hollywood. Scriptwriters shied away from including political elements. To avoid controversy, studios opted for safe, patriotic fare. The blacklist was the final straw for a lot of people. Among its most infamous victims was Dalton Trumbo, a member of the Hollywood 10. His inability to find work upon his release from prison did not deter him from continuing his fight. He carried on his job clandestinely, writing behind aliases. His screenplays were so excellent that he was nominated for 2 Oscars, one in 1953 for Roman Holiday and another in 1956 for The Brave One. Other people were given credit for both prizes. A watershed moment in Hollywood's blacklist era came in 1960, when Trumbo was at last granted credit for his efforts. Some people were not so fortunate. The political leanings of actor John Garfield were the subject of several inquiries. The strain was too much. He was 39 years old when he passed away from a heart attack. After speaking out against WAC, actress Lee Grant had her career halted for more than 10 years. In quest of employment, some departed from the jurisdiction. A number of people accepted any available positions. Alcohol was a problem for many. Sadness was prevalent. Many people's careers and personal lives were ruined by the blacklist. An important part of maintaining the blacklist was the involvement of Hollywood companies. Meetings of high-ranking executives took place at New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel in 1947. The Waldorf statement, published at that location, forbade the Hollywood 10 from working until they rejected communism. Fearing financial losses, studio leaders such as Louis B. Mayer and Jack Warner collaborated with WAC. Picketing films associated with blacklisted artists was another way the American Legion and other organizations increased the pressure. As a result, Hollywood became more cautious, steering clear of difficult themes and stifling creative expression. Collins decided to call names and testify before WAC. His wife was unmoved. The couple's marriage went badly. Dorothy Cummings, who had a breakout performance in Citizen Kane but later became a drunk, was a rising star in Hollywood. Passes away at the age of 58. The strain eventually got to Hollywood 10 defense attorney Bartley Crum, who was subject to heavy FBI surveillance. He ended his own life in 1959. Activism in Hollywood's political sphere also evolved. Numerous members of the business had already rallied behind progressive and civil rights movements prior to the blacklist. However, speaking up was risky at this time. Everyone was afraid of being blamed, even the innocent. People started to feel safer remaining silent. Breaking news on the blacklist started in 1960. Trump founded On Show was explicitly credited by Kirk Douglas and director Otto Preminger, who made a position. Expensive settings and huge actors dominated the screen in historical epics and big musicals. Budgets reached record highs because to blockbusters like Ben-Hur and Gone with the Wind. Initially, this was effective. Theaters were crowded with audiences, and studios got their money's worth. However, by the end of the 1940s, a shift had begun. Ticket sales weren't matching the ever-increasing production expenditures. The original budget for Ben-Hur was $15 million, or more than $150 million in today's money. Despite the film's initial popularity, the mounting financial concerns were impossible to overlook. After that, television came. Fewer than 10% of American households had televisions in 1950. That figure has skyrocketed after 5 years. Half or more of all homes had one. And just like that, going out for amusement became superfluous. Ticket sales for the movies plummeted. A response from Hollywood was to make larger-than-life films. When compared to television, widescreen formats like CinemaScope offered a more majestic experience. However, the production costs of the films were increased in this manner. Some studios bet it all and ended up bankrupt. Despite 20th Century Fox's best efforts, the enormous budget for Cleopatra almost bankrupted the studio. The industry was in a precarious position, and the previous methods of operation were no longer effective. Another issue arose in Hollywood. Studios were compelled to sell their cinema franchises in 1948 due to a court order known as the Paramount Decree. Prior to this, MGM and similar businesses had complete control. They ensured the film's success by producing, distributing, and screening them in their own cinemas. At this point, they had to fight for viewers' attention. The independent film industry recognized a chance. They were strapped for cash, but they were free. A pioneer among those who took advantage was John Cassavetes. He created Shadows for a meager $40,000 in 1959. It was unlike anything coming out of Hollywood at the time. According to reviews, it had a genuine and unfiltered feel. This allowed others to enter. The Graduate and Easy Rider, two films released in the late 1960s, demonstrated that even small studio pictures could achieve enormous success. People's tastes were shifting, seeking heartfelt narratives rather than impersonal, lavish extravaganzas. It was all a gamble for the major studios. They had no way of knowing how many people would see their pictures unless they had their own cinemas. Nothing was safe, not even the best films. Musicals like Gigi had made MGM famous, but when action pictures and grittier dramas were popular, even when Hollywood produced great works of art, the financial dangers were enormous. Despite being one of the best movies of all time, Lawrence of Arabia took a long time to become profitable due to its enormous budget. The Hollywood industry was in shambles. The long-established order that had governed for so long was beginning to crumble. Even once dominant studios were finding it difficult to stay up. People were looking for a change. They yearned for films with authentic characters and relatable plots. The potential was recognized by a new wave of filmmakers. Neither studio execs nor producers were among them. Their ideas were daring, and they were young filmmakers. Many of them had taken classes with Scorsese or attended NYU to learn about filmmaking. Francis Ford Coppola attended UC Los Angeles for his education. The previous regulations weren't being followed. They had created their very own. It seemed as if the streets of New York City were the setting for Scorsese's Mean Streets. The speech was unfiltered. There were major flaws with the characters. Even more dramatic was his subsequent picture, Taxi Driver. The story traced the ebb and flow of a lone military veteran as he became entangled in the mayhem of the city. Audiences were captivated by the ominous and disturbing atmosphere. Steven Spielberg came before all of that. He persisted despite never having attended film school. He had educated himself thoroughly. A straightforward tale about a vicious shark became a cultural sensation when he created Jaws. All that suspense, all that terror, and the way the camera drew you into the water alongside the people. It has a lasting impact on film. Francis Ford Coppola elevated narrative storytelling. Beyond being a gangster film, The Godfather was more. A masterpiece. The type of picture that absorbed you completely, to the point that you forgot you were viewing a work of fiction. Apocalypse followed. Now, a terrifying ordeal amid chaos and violence. He was on the verge of death from the output, yet he kept going. George Lucas came next. Mythology was his soul. Something greater than life itself was what he aspired to build. Star Wars is the culmination of his education in Japanese film and vintage adventure serials. Beyond a film, it constituted a whole cosmos. Everything from the plot to the score to the groundbreaking visual effects. Absolutely nothing like it had ever been seen before. It wasn't just these filmmakers. They went hand in hand. They supported one another. Spielberg offered Star Wars guidance. The Godfather was aided by Lucas. It wasn't a competition. In a sense, they were propelling one another on. Another event was also taking place simultaneously. It was the era of indie filmmaking. The catalyst was Easy Rider. Even though it cost very nothing to produce, it made millions. The polish was lacking. Doing so was risky. Unpredictable, honest, and full of wildness, it was. The agitated spirit of the era was encapsulated in it. I felt like everything was shifting and nobody could tell what was going to happen next. Glamour was the foundation of the old Hollywood. It provided a means of evasion for individuals. However, it wasn't what this new generation of filmmakers were interested in. They sought the truth. The Graduate and Bonnie and Clyde were two films that disappointed. They took on the anti-mold rebellion head-on. Not only was this change innovative, it also during this time, celebrities weren't symbols of immense fame. Truly, they were. They looked untidy. Taxi drivers Robert De Niro, The Graduate's Dustin Hoffman, and The Godfather's Al Pacino. In the conventional sense, these individuals weren't cinema stars. Not everything was ideal. And that's the reason why people related to them. This was the final chapter for the old guard of Hollywood. Katharine Hepburn, Cary Grant. Even in the film business, a new generation of performers was emerging to take the throne. Hollywood heavyweights of yesteryear had a hard time keeping up. Someone had taken charge. Everything was no longer within the studio's control. Producers did. Hollywood had a radical makeover by the decade's close. Everything was different now. The cinema had evolved. Storytelling as we knew it was about to change drastically.